My mom canceled my wedding behind my back. You're too mentally unstable to get married, she hissed. My sister took my venue, my cake, and my dress for herself. I showed up at her wedding with one envelope and the wedding fell silent. Even my mom couldn't speak. My name is Brianna Mitchell and I'm 29 years old. 3 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I found out my wedding was canceled. Not by me, not by Ryan, my fiancé, it was canceled by my mother. I found out from a cold, automated email that landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning while I was sipping coffee and thinking about seating charts. The sender was our caterer and the subject line was a punch to the gut. Ray. Cancellation of Mitchell wedding. I blinked, rereading it. It had to be a mistake, some clerical error. I just paid the final deposit last week. My fingers fumbled as I tapped the screen, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. The email was brief, professionally polite, just a confirmation that my tasting appointment for the following Saturday was, of course, no longer necessary. My first call was to the venue, a beautiful old winery with rolling hills that Ryan and I had fallen in love with. A polite, detached voice answered. "Yes, ma'am," she said after I gave her my name and the date. "I have the cancellation right here. Diane Mitchell called last Tuesday to cancel the arrangements." Diane, my mother, she can't do that, I stammered, the coffee turning to acid in my stomach. "The contract is in my name and Ryan's." "Yes, but Mrs. Mitchell is listed as a secondary contact, and since she was the one who placed the initial hold on the date for you, we honored her request," the voice explained, devoid of any emotion. "But don't worry, the date didn't go to waste. It's been rebooked for a Mallory Mitchell." Mallory, my older sister, the world tilted. It was like hearing a language I almost understood, but the words were all wrong, twisted into something monstrous. I pictured my wedding dress hanging in a garment bag in my closet. It was a custom piece, something I'd saved for, sketched out, and cried over when I first tried it on. The delicate lace on the sleeves, the way the silk fell, it was uniquely mine. It was the physical proof of a future I was building, a future that was apparently being unbuilt without my knowledge. I checked my phone. The screen stared back at me, blank and silent. No missed calls from Mom, no frantic texts from Mallory, my older sister, explaining some colossal misunderstanding. They had done this in complete, deafening silence. The silence itself was a statement, a confirmation that this was deliberate. My goal was clear, immediate, and fueled by a rising tide of panic. I had to get to my parents' house. I had to look them in the eye and fix this. This had to be some kind of bizarre, cruel mistake. But the cold dread coiling in my stomach told me a different story. It told me this was no mistake at all. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them on the floor. Bending to pick them up, I saw my reflection in the polished wood, a woman on the edge of a nightmare. I took a steadying breath and headed for the one place I suddenly felt was enemy territory, my childhood home. I didn't bother knocking. The front door was unlocked, as it always was, a symbol of a trust I now realized was a one-way street. I walked straight into the living room, and the scene that greeted me stopped my breath. Mom, Dad, and Mallory were huddled around the coffee table, which was covered in catalogs of floral arrangements for her wedding, on my day. In my venue, the air went still and thick, the scent of my mother's lavender air freshener suddenly cloying and suffocating. Mallory wouldn't meet my eyes. She immediately found a fascinating speck of dust on the cover of a peony catalog. My dad looked up, his expression a mixture of guilt and grim resolve. I held up my phone, my voice trembling but loud in the quiet room. The venue called, the caterer emailed. "What is going on?" My mother, Diane, didn't flinch. She was the picture of composure. She set down her delicate teacup, the one from her wedding china, and looked at me not with anger but with a kind of clinical pity that was 1,000 times worse. "Brianna, we need to be realistic," she said, her voice soft and lethal. "You're not well enough for this." The words hung in the air, a verdict I hadn't been tried for, a label slapped on me without my consent. "Not well enough?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What does that even mean? I have a job, I have a fiancé, we have a life we've been building for 3 years." She waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a gnat. Your anxiety, your moods. It's all become too much. A marriage is a serious pressure, and frankly, you're not equipped to handle it. We decided it was for the best. My eyes shot to my sister, who was now tracing the outline of a rose with her fingernail, her posture rigid. Mallory, you're just going to take my wedding? It's not your wedding anymore, Brianna, Mom said, her voice sharpening just enough to cut. It's a family event, and the family has decided you're too unstable to be at the center of it. The word unstable was a hammer blow. She said it with such authority, as if she were a doctor delivering a diagnosis. It was the moment I realized this wasn't about concern. It was about control. My dad finally spoke up, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of agreement. Your mother is right, honey. We've been worried about you for a while now. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze, and stared at a point on the wall just over my shoulder. Remember that time in college you had that panic attack before finals? We never knew when something like that might happen again. That was 7 years ago. A single panic attack brought on by 3 all-nighters and a brutal chemistry exam. They were dredging up my past, twisting it into a weapon. He went on, his tone reasonable and condescending. He mentioned my impulsive decision to switch jobs last year, a move that had led to a promotion and a significant raise, and framed it as a sign of instability. They were building a case against my own sanity, using distorted, cherry-picked pieces of my life as their evidence, presenting them as if they were a unified, damning portfolio of my incompetence. Mallory finally looked at me, her expression a mask of practiced sympathy. It just makes sense, Bri, she said, her voice so calm it was chilling. Daniel and I were going to wait until next year, but since the venue was available and all the deposits were paid, it seemed wasteful to let it all go. Daniel was Mallory's longtime partner. She spoke as if she were discussing borrowing a sweater, not hijacking the most significant day of my life. The logistics of it, the cold practicality, were what made it so breathtakingly cruel. My gaze snapped back to my mother. My thoughts were racing, and one image kept flashing in my mind. "And my dress," I whispered, the words barely audible. "Are you taking my dress too?" she scoffed, a short, sharp sound of impatience. "Don't be dramatic, it's just a dress. And it fits Mallory perfectly, we just need a few minor alterations to the bust." That was it. That was the moment the floor fell out from under me. The cold tile of the entryway seemed to drop into an endless void. It wasn't about the money or the venue or the day. It was an erasure. They were trying to literally remove me from the picture and slip my sister into my place, into my clothes, into my life. And they were telling me it was for my own good. I wasn't just being sidelined, I was being replaced. I felt a surge of defiance, a last grasp at the reality I knew. "I'm calling Ryan," I announced, my voice shaking with a fury that was finally burning through the shock. "He would never, ever stand for this. This is our wedding." My mother smiled. It was a tight, knowing, triumphant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I already spoke with Ryan," she said calmly, picking up her teacup again. "I called him yesterday. I explained the situation." A cold, primal fear gripped me. It was worse than anything I'd felt so far. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," she said, taking a delicate sip of her tea, "that we are all deeply concerned about your mental state. That you need to focus on getting better, not on the stress of planning a wedding you can't handle." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and stabbed at the screen to call him. Right there, in front of them, it was a challenge. A demand for him to refute their lies. The phone rang once, then clicked straight to his voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Ryan, leave a message." His cheerful, familiar voice was a ghost from a life I was living only this morning. I tried again. Voicemail, my tactic, my desperate appeal to reason, to fairness, to the love I thought was the bedrock of my world, had failed completely. They hadn't just made a decision. They had built a fortress of lies around it, and they had gotten to my partner before I ever knew there was a battle. My options were shrinking with every passing second. They weren't just taking my wedding. They were methodically, brilliantly isolating me. I backed out of the room, my legs feeling unsteady. I couldn't breathe their air anymore. The sound of their quiet, continued planning followed me out the door, the soft rustle of catalog pages, my mother's murmur about calla lilies. They didn't shout, they didn't argue, they just continued as if I were a brief, unpleasant interruption that was already over, as if I had already disappeared. Ryan finally called me back late that night. I had been sitting in the dark, staring at the wall, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. When it lit up with his name, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me sick. He would fix this. He would see through their lies. But the voice on the other end of the line was not the man I knew. It was distant, strained, and heavy with a weary resignation that terrified me. He didn't sound angry or even confused. He sounded convinced. "Bri," he started, and the way he said my name was wrong. It was flat, cautious. "Your mom called me. She told me about everything. Why didn't you tell me how bad things were?" My blood ran cold. "Bad, Ryan, nothing is bad. She's lying. She's stealing our wedding for Mallory." My voice was rising, bordering on frantic, and I hated that I could hear the exact hysteria they had accused me of. He sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to travel 1,000 miles. "She told me you've been hiding how much you're struggling, that the pressure of the wedding caused you to snap. She said you haven't been sleeping, that you're having panic attacks again." My mother had taken my normal, everyday stresses and woven them into a tapestry of a full-blown mental breakdown. She had twisted my anxieties about work deadlines and vendor contracts into evidence of a fragile mind. "She sent me an email, Bri," Ryan continued, his voice full of a pained sort of logic. "She forwarded some texts from you where you sounded, I don't know, really stressed out. She's just worried about you. They all are." I remembered those texts instantly. One was me venting after a brutal day at work. Another was a frustrated message about a florist mix-up, normal bride stress, things I had shared with him, things he had comforted me about. She had gone into our shared family plan, dug up my private words, and weaponized them against me. She had presented them as exhibits in the trial for my sanity. "She's manipulating you, Ryan, can't you see that?" I pleaded. I need some space," he said, the words I had been dreading. "I can't handle this right now, Bri. It's too much, your family, it's a lot." He wasn't fighting for us. He wasn't even questioning my mother's narrative. He was simply backing away from the drama, from the complication I had become. He chose the path of least resistance, and that path led away from me. The next morning, I woke up to a series of cold, digital cuts. A notification from a family messaging app informed me. "You have been removed from the Mitchell clan group." It was so petty, so juvenile, yet it felt like a door being slammed and bolted in my face. Then I opened social media. Mallory had posted a picture of herself. She was standing in front of a three-way mirror in a bridal boutique, beaming. She was wearing my dress, my custom-made, one-of-a-kind dress. The caption was a saccharine stab to the heart. "Sometimes things just fall into place. Can't wait to marry my best friend, Daniel Brooks," meant to be wedding bells. Daniel was her longtime partner. My phone started buzzing with texts from confused friends. "Isn't that the dress you designed? I thought your wedding was next month. What's going on?" My mother was systematically cutting me off, replacing my story with Mallory's, and she was doing it in public. They were daring me to contradict them, knowing they had already framed me as the crazy one. I tried calling Ryan again, a desperate, foolish act. No answer. His social media, usually full of updates about his life and our life together, had gone dark. I got in my car, my mind a numb haze of disbelief, and drove to his apartment. His car wasn't in its usual spot. A neighbor, a kind older woman who always asked about our wedding plans, saw me standing on the sidewalk, staring at the empty space. She gave me a deeply sympathetic look. "He packed a bag and left early this morning, dear," she said softly. "Looked like he was in a real hurry, didn't say where he was going." He was gone, no goodbye, no conversation. Just an empty parking spot and a neighbor's pity. My mother's campaign had been ruthlessly efficient. She hadn't just stolen a venue and a dress, she had dismantled my entire support system. She had surgically removed the man I loved from my life. This was never just about a wedding. It was about her absolute, terrifying need for control and her chilling perception of me as a flawed, disposable daughter who could be set aside for the preferred model. I drove to the one place I had left. I sat in my car outside my best friend Maya Patel's apartment and called her, my voice finally breaking into ragged, uncontrollable sobs. I could barely get the words out. I told her everything, the cancellation, the unstable label, Mallory in my dress, and finally Ryan leaving without a word. Maya listened without interrupting. When I was finished, choking on the last of my tears, she didn't offer me platitudes or gentle reassurances. She offered me pure, undiluted fury. "They what?" she roared into the phone. "Brianna, this isn't just cruel, it's clinically insane. They've lost their minds." Hearing her say it, hearing my own reality validated in her anger, was like a gasp of air after being held underwater. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't imagining the cruelty, I was being victimized. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, which now felt like a museum of a dead future. The little boxes of wedding favors I'd already assembled sat on the dining table. The calligraphed place cards with Brianna and Ryan were stacked neatly by the door. Each object was a tiny monument to my humiliation, to my powerlessness. My family had successfully branded me as unreliable, broken, and alone. By all accounts, they had won. They had taken everything, and I had no way to fight back. But as I sat there, staring at a framed photo of me and Ryan from the day he proposed, a different feeling began to surface under the immense weight of my grief. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in my gut and spread through my veins. It was a quiet, precise anger. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was unstable. They thought they could break me and sweep me aside. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Maya came over the next evening armed with 2 bottles of expensive red wine and a metaphorical blowtorch. "We are not letting them get away with this," she declared, pouring me a glass that was mostly full. "Tonight, we grieve. Tomorrow, we strategize." We spent the first hour scrolling through Mallory's social media, a painful exercise in digital self-flagellation. There she was, beaming in my dress. There she was with Daniel, her fiancé, clinking champagne glasses at my venue, captioned, "A little pre-wedding site visit." Every post was a smug victory lap. Maya, swirling her wine, said something idly, more to herself than to me. "She's been desperate to lock Daniel down for years. Funny how she took that random trip to Greece all by herself 6 months ago. That was right when he was dragging his feet about a proposal, wasn't it?" The comment was like a flashbulb going off in a dark room. It sparked a memory I hadn't thought about in months. The trip hadn't just been random. Mallory had been intensely secretive about it, which was unlike her. She was usually a chronic oversharer. I remembered asking her how the trip was when she got back. She'd been so vague, so dismissive. "Oh, you know," she'd said, waving her hand. "Old buildings, great food, the usual." But then she'd added something that had struck me as odd at the time. "The bureaucracy there is a total nightmare, though, so much paperwork for a simple arrangement." I'd assumed she meant a hotel booking or maybe a rental car issue. But now, filtered through the lens of her current betrayal, the words felt different. Heavier. Why would a solo tourist on a sightseeing trip be dealing with bureaucracy and paperwork? It wasn't the language of a vacation, it was the language of a transaction. The memory was the first crack in Mallory's perfect, stolen fairytale. It was a loose thread, and I decided right then and there that I was going to pull on it until the whole thing unraveled. Fueled by wine and a burgeoning sense of purpose, I started digging. My hands, which had been trembling for days, were now steady. I scrolled back through months of old text messages with Mallory, searching for anything around the time of her supposed trip to Greece. Most of it was mundane chatter about work and family gossip, but then I found it. She had sent me a stunning photo of a white sand beach, the water a brilliant turquoise. But the location tag automatically generated by her phone didn't say Greece. It said Limassol, Cyprus. I remembered texting her back, "Wow, Cyprus is beautiful." "I thought you were in Santorini." Her reply had come back almost instantly. Oops, wrong pic, that's from a work thing last year, jet lag brain. The thing was, she hadn't had a work trip to Cyprus. I knew her travel schedule intimately. It was a small, insignificant lie at the time, but now it felt monumental. Why lie about the location? Maya, who is an absolute genius with online research, immediately started looking into Cyprus. Specifically, she typed "quick civil marriages for foreigners in Cyprus" into her search bar. It didn't take long to discover that the island, particularly cities like Limassol, was a well-known destination for convenience marriages. The process was fast, the legal requirements were minimal, and the marriage certificates were recognized in the United States. It felt like a wild, desperate long shot, but we had a location and a time frame. Maya found the public online registry for the Limassol municipality. It was mostly in Greek, which was a problem, but names were searchable in English. We started the painstaking process of scrolling through the digital marriage announcements for the exact week Mallory was there. Page after page of unfamiliar names blurred before my eyes. For a moment, I felt foolish. This was a crazy conspiracy theory born from grief. What were the chances? And then my heart stopped. It was there, under the civil marriages section for a Thursday 6 months ago. The name was printed in stark, undeniable black and white. Mallory E. Mitchell. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. My vision tunneled until the only thing I could see was her name. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a coincidence. And the groom's name listed beside hers was not Daniel Brooks. It was a name I'd never heard before in my life. Suddenly, everything clicked into its horrible place. The secret solo trip, the lie about Greece, the weird comment about paperwork and arrangements. My sister, my perfect golden child older sister, was already married. Which meant she was about to commit bigamy, knowingly marrying a second person while still legally married to the first. This was no longer just a cruel family drama, this was a serious crime. In that instant, whatever was left of the broken, weeping girl from yesterday burned away, leaving something hard and cold in its place. I took a screenshot of the page, the click of my phone sounding like a gavel. My old goal, getting my wedding, my fiancé, my old life back, was dead and buried. My new goal was justice, cold, hard, and undeniable. And the ticking clock was Mallory's wedding day, now just 2 short weeks away. The screenshot was a start, but it wasn't enough. It was just an image on a screen, something my mother could easily dismiss as a fabrication, another symptom of my supposed instability. We needed official, undeniable proof. Maya had a cousin who worked as a paralegal in a firm that specialized in international law. We called her, framing our question as a hypothetical research project for a class. She was incredibly helpful, explaining exactly how to request a certified copy of a marriage certificate from the Cyprus Municipality Records Office. It would cost a few $100s and take time, but there was an option to have it expedited for an extra fee. I didn't hesitate for a second. The day before, the caterer had called to tell me my deposit was being refunded. I used that very money to pay the expedite fee. It felt like a small, sharp piece of poetic justice, using the funds from my canceled wedding to purchase the evidence that would blow up hers. This discovery had fundamentally flipped a switch in my mind. Mallory was no longer just my opportunistic sister, she was a criminal. My mother wasn't just a cruel manipulator, she was an accomplice to that crime, whether she knew the specifics or not. My dad wasn't just a passive bystander. He was a willing enabler. The family I was trying to win back didn't actually exist. The plan formed in my head then, not as a messy burst of rage, but as a cool, clear sequence of events. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to send Mallory an anonymous text with the screenshot. Confrontation was their game, their territory. They were masters of twisting words, of gaslighting, of turning my legitimate pain into proof of my hysteria. No. This required a different approach. It required precision, irrefutable evidence, and an audience that couldn't be emotionally manipulated. I wouldn't stop the wedding by screaming, "I object." I would stop it with the quiet, undeniable weight of the law. The next, crucial step was to understand the why. A secret marriage to a complete stranger screamed one thing: money. It had to be a transaction. Maya and I started looking for the man from the marriage certificate. His name was unique enough that it didn't take long to find him on a professional networking site. His profile was polished and impressive. It showed that he'd recently relocated from overseas to the United States and had started a new, very high-paying job in the tech sector. It was a job that absolutely would have required legal residency status. His start date was just 3 weeks after the date on the Cyprus marriage certificate. It was almost certainly an immigration fraud scheme. He paid Mallory a substantial sum of money for a marriage certificate, which he then used to get a green card and secure his lucrative job. In that moment, sitting in Maya's apartment with the glow of the laptop on my face, I made the irreversible choice. I wasn't just going to expose Mallory for bigamy to stop the wedding. I was going to expose the entire fraudulent scheme. This was bigger than my stolen dress. It was about a federal crime. I consciously accepted the personal cost. This would detonate my family. There would be no path to reconciliation, no possibility of ever going back. I would be the one holding the match. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel broken or powerless. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I felt powerful. They had all underestimated the quiet, unstable daughter, and that was going to be their undoing. The express package from Cyprus arrived a week before the wedding. It was a plain, sturdy envelope with foreign postage, but to me, it felt like it was humming with energy. Holding the official, certified marriage certificate in my hands was an electrifying experience. The crisp paper, the embossed seal, the formal signatures, this wasn't a screenshot anymore. This was my sword, but I wasn't done. I needed to connect the marriage to the motive. Using a public records search service I paid for online, I found a new bank account Mallory had opened in her name alone, right after she got back from her trip. A little more digging into financial record aggregators revealed the smoking gun: a single wire transfer deposited into that account a week later. The amount was $40,000. I found the final pieces in an old, forgotten shared family cloud account we all used for holiday photos. Buried in a subfolder was a document Mallory must have saved by mistake. It contained scanned copies of her email correspondence with the man from the certificate. They discussed their agreement in thinly veiled terms, referring to the money as a loan and the marriage as a business partnership. It was careless, arrogant, and absolutely damning. I printed everything: the bank statement, the emails. I laid it all out on Maya's kitchen table next to the marriage certificate. My goal was no longer just to stop the wedding. It was restated, bolder, and far riskier. I will deliver this complete package of evidence to the proper authorities at the moment of maximum impact, ensuring my family cannot spin, deny, or escape the legal consequences. That afternoon, I went shopping. I didn't go to a boutique or a department store. I went to a simple, no-frills shop and bought a plain black dress. It wasn't a morning dress, not really. It was a statement. It was the color of finality, of a line being drawn that could never be undrawn. I went home and sealed clean copies of all the documents in a crisp manila envelope. All I had to do now was wait for the day they had stolen from me. It was coming. My mother must have sensed the shift in my silence. It was no longer the bruised, weeping silence of a victim. It had become the quiet, coiled silence of a predator. She called me 4 days before the wedding, her voice dripping with a syrupy sweetness that always preceded an attack. "Brianna, darling," she cooed, "we haven't heard from you. I do hope you're not dwelling on things. Mallory is so excited. We all are." I gave her nothing. "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat and empty. Her tone hardened instantly. The sweetness evaporated, revealing the steel beneath. "Your cousin mentioned you were asking some strange questions about Mallory's trip last year. I don't appreciate you digging into your sister's private life. You need to stop this unhealthy obsession and move on." So my quiet inquiries had been reported back to headquarters. The family network, the same one that had once supported me, was now a surveillance system working against me. She was trying to shut down my investigation before it could bear fruit, terrified of what I might find. Then she delivered the unveiled threat. I want you to be very clear about this, Brianna. If you cause any kind of scene at the wedding, you will regret it more than you can possibly imagine. We will make sure every single person we know understands just how unstable you've become. We can be very, very convincing. It was a direct warning shot. They weren't just prepared to defend against me. They were prepared to launch a full-scale character assassination. Her threat did nothing but confirm my strategy. I could not show my hand early. Any hint of what I knew would be immediately twisted into another one of my delusions. 2 days after my mother's warning call, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my apartment door. My parents owned the small building I lived in. It was a deal they had offered me after I graduated college, a slightly lower rent in exchange for being close by. It had always felt like a safety net. Now I saw it for what it was, a leash. The notice was a formal legal document, a 30-day eviction. The reason cited was a vague, planned building renovations, but I knew the truth with absolute certainty. This was a power play. This was retaliation. They were trying to take my home, my safe space, the very ground beneath my feet. They were trying to destabilize me completely, to make me desperate, homeless, and easier to control. The message was brutally clear: we control every aspect of your life and we can take it all away if you don't obey. The public consequence was immediate. The building manager, a friendly man who had known me for years and always asked after my cat, suddenly couldn't look me in the eye. My family was poisoning the well, turning people who were once friendly into wary strangers. The pressure was immense, but it didn't break me. It did the opposite. It forged my resolve into something harder than steel. They were proving my point for me, demonstrating their own cruelty with every move they made. The final week before the wedding was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The smear campaign my mother had threatened began in earnest. I started getting calls and texts from mutual friends and extended family. It became clear that Mom and Mallory were on a PR blitz, telling everyone who would listen that I was having a severe mental health crisis. They twisted the story into something unrecognizable. They said Ryan had left because he was scared of my erratic and aggressive behavior. They said my obsession with Mallory's happiness was a symptom of a deep-seated jealousy that had finally curdled into delusion. They were methodically and preemptively discrediting me, ensuring that if I did try to speak up at the wedding, no one would believe a word I said. I would just be the crazy sister having a public breakdown exactly as they'd predicted. My aunt called me, her voice thick with a cloying, false concern, practically begging me to seek professional help and stop harassing your poor sister during what should be the happiest time of her life. Every call, every concerned text was a small, precise cut designed to make me doubt my own sanity, to make me feel so utterly alone that I would have no choice but to back down. The exposure was deeply humiliating. They were turning my entire social circle against me, skillfully painting me as the villain in the story of my own destruction. But with every lie they told, the contents of my manila envelope felt heavier, more righteous, and more necessary. They thought they were isolating me. In reality, they were just freeing me from any lingering, sentimental sense of family obligation. They were burning the bridges for me. With the wedding just days away, Maya and I decided to do one last deep dive on Mallory's first husband, the man from the Cyprus certificate. We had his name and we'd found his professional profile, but we wanted to see if we could find anything more personal. Through a tagged photo on a colleague's public page, we found his private social media profile, and he had forgotten to lock it down. It was a treasure trove of the truth. There were dozens of photos of him with another woman, clearly his real, long-term partner. They were pictured on vacations, at holiday dinners with friends. They had been together for years, and then we saw it. A post from just 2 months ago. It was a smiling photo of him and his partner holding up a brand new, gleaming United States permanent resident card, a green card. The caption read, "Finally official." The long, complicated wait is over. So grateful to my amazing partner and to everyone who helped us navigate the process and build our new life here. The second reveal was chilling and absolute. He wasn't just some random man Mallory had a fling with. He and his partner had used my sister as a pawn in a sophisticated immigration scheme. This wasn't just a simple marriage for money deal for one person. It was a carefully constructed conspiracy to bypass the legal immigration process for a committed couple. Mallory wasn't just greedy, she was a willing, integral participant in a complex web of lies. It fused all the threads together: the personal betrayal, the financial crime, the legal fraud. It was all one big, ugly story. The evidence was now so overwhelming it felt like a physical weight. I took screenshots of everything: the photos, the caption, the dates. The manila envelope was about to get a lot thicker. I'd been nursing the idea of a quiet solution. I'd send everything anonymously to Daniel. Maybe he'd pull Mallory aside, maybe he'd call the whole thing off without dragging me into it. I'd convinced myself that if he knew the truth, he wouldn't stand for it. That illusion died the afternoon I saw them at my building. I was halfway through boxing up my kitchen when a black car pulled up and Mom, Mallory, and Daniel climbed out. They were laughing too loud, the way people do when they want to sound casual. Mom pointed at my second-floor window and said something about how that extra room would be perfect for newlyweds. Mallory floated around the stoop, acting like a real estate agent showing a model home. Daniel stood there smiling, a man already imagining a life in my rooms. I watched them through the blinds, my hands suddenly cold on the bubble wrap. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't apologetic. He was picturing himself moving in. That realization hit me like a physical shove. If he was benefiting from their plan, if he was comfortable stepping into the space they'd cleared for him, then he wasn't an innocent bystander. He was part of the arrangement, even if he didn't know every sordid detail. He'd be fine with this life, with this theft, because it served him. The idea of sliding an anonymous packet of evidence into his hands felt childish then. He deserved the truth in full view, not a whisper. He deserved to see the legal weight drop in a room where everyone could watch. Whatever sympathy he might have had would mean nothing if he was willing to live with the outcome of their choices. My choice hardened into something ugly and neat. If he was going to live in the life they'd taken from me, he should see it end publicly. The last safe option was gone. I didn't have a path that avoided contact with him and the family. The anonymous drop that would let me sleep at night without burning bridges was no longer an option. He'd seen my apartment turned into their future and he'd smiled as if it was his right. There were no half measures left. The plan had to be precise, public, and irreversible. The only lever I had left to pry away their lies was the law, and I was going to put it where it could not be ignored. That night I spread everything out on Maya's coffee table like a crime scene. The Cyprus certificate lay on top, its foreign seal catching the lamplight. Beside it were the bank statements with the $40,000 wire circled in red ink, the printed emails with their clinical transactional language, and the screenshots of the other man's posts with his partner's new green card. I glanced at the clock and felt the throttle of panic pull harder. The wedding was 3 days away. The signing of the license was the moment it would become official. That was the hinge. We mapped out the timing down to the minute. I couldn't risk being stopped before the crucial act. If I went in early, Mom and Mallory would have time to spin it into another melodrama about my instability. If I objected during vows, they'd accuse me of a scene. The marriage license signing was the only procedural moment that would actually put the law on notice before any signatures made it a legal mess. It would force officials to act before anything could be retroactively cleaned up. Mark Ellis, the county registrar, was listed as the official who would be processing the license. He'd been polite in the email correspondence exchanged between the venue and the county office. He struck me as the type who followed rules and hated surprises. I needed him to see the paper before he had his pen in hand. The plan was surgical. I would arrive during the cocktail hour dressed in black so I didn't look like a bridesmaid or a jilted rival. I would hand the envelope to the registrar, ask him to read it, and let the procedure take over. I rehearsed my line until it sounded like a fact instead of a nervous plea. Before you sign, you have to review this. That was it. No accusations, no theatrics, facts delivered in a way the law couldn't ignore. Maya bought me a simple, unadorned black dress and ironed it with deliberate care. Her voice was steady as she smoothed out the fabric. You don't have to shout, she said. They'll try to make it about how loud you are, make it about the documents. Her hands lingered on my shoulders as if bracing me. I pictured my mother at the head table, the expression on her face when bureaucratic truth walked into their celebration. The thought steadied me. I sealed the manila envelope and for the first time felt the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. This wasn't a tantrum, this wasn't a cry for attention, it was a surgical strike designed to prevent a crime. I fell asleep that night with the envelope on the kitchen counter, knowing if I woke up and chickened out, there'd be no going back. The clock was merciless. The night was short and white with nerves. Morning arrived with a text that opened old wounds. It was from Ryan. The number was blocked to everyone but me, but the message slipped through like a blade. I heard what you're planning. Don't do this, Bri. It won't make you happy. He didn't call. He didn't ask questions. He assumed. His words were meant as a plea, soft and final. The text hit the exact place Mom had been aiming for. It brought back nights when I lay awake, certain the world would end if I made the wrong decision. For a second I could feel that small girl again, the one who wanted her parents to like her, who feared being abandoned. I pictured a scenario where I stormed into the wedding and became the villain in 100 narratives, the unstable sister, the bitter ex-fiancé, the one who ruined their day. I sat on Maya's couch with the phone humming in my palm. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower. Sunlight slanted across the table where my evidence lay like a patient animal. I felt the vertigo of being utterly alone. Mom and Mallory had convinced half my life that I was untrustworthy. Ryan's message suggested even he had been softened by them, perhaps in private calls I would never know about. It was the worst kind of abandonment, quiet, reasonable, and final. The old narratives crowded in. If I expose them, my family will be destroyed. If I stay silent, I become a footnote in Mallory's staged happy ending. If I act, I will be the subject of gossip, interviews, and merciless commentary. My chest tightened as I thought of Dad's softened eyes, the way he'd avoid conflict. I thought of Mom's clinical pity. The past had always been a weapon they used with surgical precision. Now it felt like the scene right before a fall. For a long time I sat there feeling the weight of two lives. The small, safe one that would crumble if I chose truth, and the other where I had to stand in the quiet to let facts speak. Fear whispered that I might be condemned as cruel as the destroyer of a family. It also whispered that if I didn't act, my life would be a slow fade into other people's stories. I stared at the black dress hanging on the back of the door, and for the first time in weeks, my hands didn't shake when I reached for it. The text from Ryan was a severing gesture, but out of the wound, a clearer thing grew, an understanding that once truth is in the open, it's not revocable. I told Maya about the message. Her jaw tightened the way it did when she was protective, and she reached up and pulled a small box from beneath a stack of mail. I was going to give this to you at your bridal shower, she said without a hint of sarcasm. She had that look in her eye, part mischief, part fierce loyalty. Inside the box was a simple silver locket. It was old, the kind you could imagine passing down in a family if families did that honestly. I opened it. One side held a tiny photo of Maya and me from college, both of us laughing at something ridiculous. The other side had a folded scrap of paper tucked behind the hinge. It was a quote I'd underlined in a book once and then forgotten. "The truth is a blade that only cuts what is false." I read it 3 times, each syllable settling into place. Maya set the box down and put her hand over mine. "They stole your day," she said. "They're trying to steal your story. This isn't about making you feel better, it's about setting the record straight." She didn't try to tell me what to do. She didn't plead for me to think of the fallout. Instead, she offered me a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. When you walk into that room, you won't be a madwoman, she said. You'll be someone giving documents to a county official who has to respond. It's procedural, cold, unemotional. Let the rules do the work. Her voice peeled back the panic. The locket was cool against my skin when I clipped it around my neck. It felt like armor in a ridiculous small way. I thought of the little girl who wanted her parents' approval and felt the old hunger for belonging. Then I thought of all the times they'd used that hunger against me. It was time to stop pretending their approval mattered more than my truth. I deleted Ryan's message and then blocked his number. It wasn't pure revenge, it was a practical step. I couldn't have my resolve undermined by fragments of grief dressed up as concern. He'd made his choice the day he let my mom speak for me. There was a tiny death of hope there, but also a relief, as if a band had been cut away. If he couldn't stand beside me now, he couldn't ever be part of the life I was going to build after this. Maya helped me pack a small bag. We rehearsed my approach once, mock serious, so the words would be clean and the movement rehearsed. Walk to the registrar, hand over the envelope, say, "These are legal documents that need to be reviewed," and step back. No drama, no speeches, no pleas, procedural, unassailable. Standing in the doorway, the black dress fitting like a second skin, I felt more alone than I'd ever been, but I also felt something that wasn't fear. It was a cold certainty that the choice had already been made. I had decided to be the person who let the facts do the talking. Whether I would walk out of that venue with a family shattered or with the quiet satisfaction of a wrong righted, I couldn't say. All I knew was that for the first time in months I was acting on my terms. I wasn't the frightened daughter my mom said I was. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was carrying the truth, and I was ready to hand it to the law. The venue smelled like lemon oil and roses, the kind of clean, prepared scent that made everything feel like it had been wrapped in tissue paper and labeled perfect. I walked in during cocktail hour, and for a second it was like stepping back into a life I had already mourned. The string quartet was playing a cheerful piece, the notes looping in a way that made the room feel small and safe for everyone except me. Conversations fluttered around me, the clinking of glasses mixing with soft laughter. Then heads turned. My black dress cut a line through the pastel and cream. People blinked and the music stumbled as if the quartet itself had noticed the change in temperature. I could see the ripple move across the room, curiosity, then confusion, then the small human habit of turning toward trouble. I saw Mom first. Her smile froze into a mask the second our eyes met. There was a flash of something fierce in her face, the same look she had when she was about to set the dinner table with purpose, but sharper. Mallory was standing with Daniel near the center, wearing the dress that had been mine. She caught sight of me and her bright laughter died midair. For a moment her face was a study in panic, thin, surprised, brittle, then she tried to rearrange it into calm. I didn't look at them. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of my gaze. I moved through the room like a woman with a destination, not a confrontation. The guests parted without a word. Some looked at me with curiosity. Others had that small, polite smile people use when they want to be safe. The air felt thick with held breaths, as if everyone knew something important was about to happen but didn't yet know what their part would be. My target was easy to spot. Mark Ellis, the county registrar, stood by a small table near the back, the marriage license laid out in a neat folder ready to be signed. He looked like someone who wore sensible shoes and checked his collar when people arrived, respectful of procedure. That was what I needed, not rage, not pleading, procedure. The law, when put in front of a man who took his job seriously, doesn't care about family histories or messy emotions. It only cares about papers and dates. I walked straight to the table. The room's hum lowered to a hush like a tide pulling out. Mark looked up at me with a polite smile that quickly faltered into curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was a catalog clerk's voice, pleasant, ready to assist. I reached out and set the manila envelope on top of his license. The paper made a small sound against the linen, a crisp, final click. I met his eyes and said, calm and steady, "Before you sign, you need to review the contents of this envelope. There was a beat of silence so complete I felt it in my teeth. My mother was a step forward, whispering, "Brianna, don't you dare," but Mallory's mouth had gone slack. Daniel looked like a man who had woken up in someone else's plan. Guests shifted, glasses were set down on trays. The string quartet's rhythm thinned into something worried. Mark hesitated, the professional in him sensing the unusual. He picked up the envelope and opened it with a kind of ritual care, as if he were unwrapping a present at his mother's table. He slid out the first document and the room felt colder. It was the certified marriage certificate from Limassol, Cyprus, official and foreign and undeniable. The curling letters and the embossed seal felt like a whispered accusation in a room full of lies. I watched his face as he read. The practiced smile dropped. He read another page. My printed bank statement and the email copies slid into his view, then the screenshots on a small printed sheet of the other man's social media post holding his permanent resident card. His professional demeanor shifted from polite to serious very quickly. He looked up at Mallory and said quietly, "Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain this?" Mallory's first instinct was to sputter denial. "It's a mistake," she began, voice too high, words tumbling. Someone is forging." She stopped because the room refused to make space for a performance. The facts lay out flat on the table between us, and there was nowhere for her lies to hide. Mark pulled out the next sheet. The bank record with the wire transfer was circled in thick, honest ink. Daniel's face changed color when he saw the number. He asked, bewildered, $40,000, what is that for? Mom's voice rose then, sharp and fast, as if speed could bury detail. "This is harassment. My daughter has been unwell." "This is a forgery. You can't." She moved toward the table, her hand out as if to snatch the truth back into her palm, but Mark didn't flinch. He set his jaw the way someone sets it when they're doing something necessary and unpleasant. "This signing is suspended," he said, and his voice had the weight of a gavel even though it was only a small table. "I have to report this to the authorities. This is now a potential crime." He picked up a small radio-like device and spoke into it in a hushed tone I'd heard in movies. It was a real, procedural thing. Two men in plain clothes stepped out from the back, quietly moving with the kind of practiced calm that shows up in police stations and hospital rooms. One of them introduced herself as Investigator Laura King. She was all business, no whispering, no theatrics. Her voice was clear and even. She asked Mallory to come with her for a few questions. Mallory's face crumpled into something like shock and anger, a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar, but the look was more fragile than defiant. Daniel looked stricken. Mom had gone still, the color leaving her cheeks. Dad, who'd been hovering like a weather vane, looked smaller than I had ever seen him. No one shouted, I remember thinking, standing there in black, my fingers a little numb from the coldness of the envelope. Nothing about my action was loud. The room wasn't a riot scene, it was a slow collapse. The law, introduced patiently and correctly, did its job. That was the part I had wanted, not spectacle, not revenge. A clean stopping of the machinery they planned to crank up. I didn't gloat, I didn't raise my voice. As Investigator King guided Mallory away in a quiet, efficient whisper that rattled my family to their bones, my mother began to shout at the venue manager in a voice that would have once been described as proper outrage. She waved her hands and tried to rally a narrative about my instability, about how this whole thing was a cruel prank. But Mark and the investigators had already started taking their notes. There were cameras, forms, and people who moved with a kind of indifferent authority that a family cannot charm away. I left before Mallory was fully escorted through the doors. I didn't want to watch the whole implosion like a spectator at someone else's tragedy. The walk back to Maya's car was odd because the world seemed louder, salt and citrus from the past hors d'oeuvres, a child's giggle drifting from the patio, but inside me there was a kind of quiet so deep it surprised me. It wasn't the shallow relief of a small victory. It was the long, steady breath a person takes after holding panic in their chest for too long. I drove home in silence, the manila envelope resting on the passenger seat like a small, heavy thing that had finally been used for what it was made for. Over the next few days, the story spread like a stain. Mallory was charged with creating a false marriage to help another person get residency. Daniel called off the wedding and started talking to lawyers. The United States Attorney's Office, with Assistant United States Attorney Jason Reed at the head of it, opened an investigation into the immigration part of the scheme. I got a single phone call from an immigration officer named Alex Rivera asking me to come in and answer some questions. He was professional, not judgy, and his voice made me feel less like an accuser and more like a witness. My family shattered in ways that were public and private. Mom stopped returning my calls. Dad sent a single text the week after that said, "This is all so complicated. We need time." Time in this case meant silence. Mallory's friends cut her off. A cousin texted that he'd been asked to speak to a reporter and that his side was complicated. The cost to them was obvious: broken relationships, legal bills, humiliation that would take years to whisper away. My cost was different. I lost them. Not in the slow, slippery way that sometimes happens when people grow apart, but in a sudden, surgical way. The family I had thought would be there at hospital beds and graduations and anniversaries was gone. There would be no reconciling chat over coffee to smooth things back into place. The break was as real as the sealed envelope that started it all. And still, the quiet in my life felt like a new kind of freedom. No more manipulative calls, no more carefully angled pity. The silence was clean. It was not empty. It was a space where I could breathe without someone else measuring my breath for signs of weakness. I had wanted my wedding back, and I did not get it. What I got instead was something I had not known I wanted: a life I could start claiming on my own without the weight of their stories on top. A week after the wedding debacle, I was packing the last box from my old apartment. The eviction was still in motion. My parents had not backed down from their attempt to reclaim control, but it didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like clearing out a set of rooms that had been decorated by other people for a story I wasn't in. I folded shirts and wrapped picture frames, and even as the apartment grew emptier, I felt more whole. I stood in front of the closet and looked at a garment bag hanging in the back. The custom dress was still there, its lace soft from the careful attention of whoever had stored it. For a moment, my hands hovered over the zipper, and I thought about pulling it out and burning it, or shredding it into confetti and mailing it to them. Instead, I took a photo of the dress with my phone, captioned the image, "A chapter closed," and left it in my camera roll as a marker. Then I left a short note for the landlord asking that the dress be donated to someone who might need it more. It felt like exile, but in a dignified way. Walking out of that apartment building for the last time, wearing the simple black dress I had bought for the wedding hour I never got, felt like walking out of a small, stifling theater and into sunlight. There was no fanfare, no applause. The street smelled like rain and exhaust, and somewhere nearby, baking bread. My hands were empty except for a small box of essentials and the silver locket Maya had given me. I clipped the locket on again and felt the cool metal against my skin. It reminded me that I had a friend who believed in me. I didn't have a wedding to piece together. I didn't have the life I'd planned stacked neatly on a photo-laden mantle. But I had something that felt steadier, the knowledge that I would make choices on my terms from now on. The black dress was not a symbol of mourning anymore. It was a badge of authority. I had shown up when it mattered, handed the truth to people who couldn't rewrite it, and then walked away without cheering. There would be hard days, court dates, questions about what I'd done, and the empty chair where my family used to sit at holidays. But there was also a strange, quiet happiness that came from knowing I didn't have to live a story someone else had written about me. If you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own story, leave a comment below. Tell me what happened or how you found your voice. And if you want more stories about people who take back what was taken from them, subscribe and check out another video.